before you is probably the most profound philosophical painting you have ever seen. The problem is that its philosophical message is not immediately obvious. It has to be revealed. Also, you may have never seen this painting before, but about 140 million people have known it since childhood, though they usually have a much simpler and more straightforward understanding of this work of art. Okay, I guess you are already confused. Let me explain what I mean. The name of the artist was Ilya Repin, and he is rightfully considered the most important Russian realist painter of the 19th century. This was his first major work, presented to the public in 1873. It is known as Burlaki na Volge, which can be translated as barge haulers on the Volga. You see, the Volga is one of the major rivers in the European part of Russia. It flows from the north to the south into the Caspian Sea. In the southern region through which the river passes, people traditionally harvested large amounts of grain. The problem was how to deliver it upstream to the northern part of Russia. With the appearance of steamships, which could move against the current, this became easier. But before that, for decades, human labor was used instead. A group of workers would literally harness themselves to a barge and pull it with a rope, slowly trudging along the riverbank. The Russian name for those people is burlaki. It was hard, back-breaking, body-destroying, and poorly paid labor. And that was precisely the theme of Repin's first major artwork. The success of this painting was astonishing, and Repin's obvious talent was only part of the reason. The second major factor was an article written by the most influential art critic in Russia at that time, Vladimir Stasov. You see, Stasov had a very simple theory. For hundreds of years, he would say again and again in his articles and manifestos, Russian commoners have been oppressed, robbed, and humiliated by the ruling class. All the wealth of the country, the magnificent architecture of its capital, which at the time was St. Petersburg, and all the achievements of Russian culture had been built on the oppression and exploitation of ordinary people. This means that people of the upper class, including writers, artists, and musicians, were forever in debt. And the only way for them to repay that debt was to constantly speak on behalf of the Russian common people, to expose their misery and the horrible conditions in which they lived. And that is exactly what Rapin did. In his painting, we see barge haulers, exhausted by heavy labor. They are dressed in miserable, torn rags. These people are crushed by poverty, high taxes, bureaucracy, and the horrors of capitalism. The painting literally screams about their suffering, and that is its great merit. That is what makes it a masterpiece. That was Stasov's explanation. Now, for Repin's contemporaries, this interpretation was acceptable. But for the Soviet government, it was perfect. It was simple, straightforward, and perfectly in line with the communist ideology. So, in Soviet times, reproductions of this painting could be found in every school textbook, including the one I had when I was at school. My name is Alexei Pashkov, by the way. I am an art historian, and I happen to be born and raised in Russia, which is probably obvious from my accent. And of course, it was interpreted in the most primitive socialistic way. Rich people, bad. Poor people, good. That is the whole meaning of the painting, period. The simplicity of such a view is tempting, but personally, I have always had two problems with it. First, we now have Repin's published memoirs, in which he literally disproves this view. Repin says that he was obsessed with a purely artistic challenge to reveal the character of each burlak, to show his human personality through the torn rags he is wearing. And not a single word is said about class struggle or financial inequality as the main theme of his work. All right? Also, think about this. Repin was not the only Russian realist. Dozens of his colleagues created hundreds of scenes showing the hard life of Russian commoners, like this one, or this one, or this one, or this one. And yet, it was obvious from the very beginning that Repin's painting was extremely captivating. So there was something else in it, some mysterious ingredient that other paintings on the same subject simply missed. The question is, what is it? Well, I recently took a long, hard look at this painting and experienced something almost like a revelation. So, to me, this is now not an indictment of an unjust social structure of 19th century Russian society, but rather a profound philosophical meditation, which ends with a surprisingly useful message. And yes, this view is purely subjective, but still, it might be worth hearing. So, let me explain the meaning of the barge. The philosophical matrix of four attitudes towards life expressed in the first group of holders, the stern warning contained in the second group, and finally, the most sublime, noble, and humanistic meaning of the third group. Okay, let's start with the barge, since it's pretty obvious. Pulling it is a metaphor for life. Already in the Middle Ages, life was allegorically shown as a long and difficult march through hostile terrain. Bosch's painting is case in point. Moreover, nobody travels light. We all have our baggage, both figuratively and literally. And the saddest part is that we do not choose our baggage. It is forced upon us by blind fate. Country we are born in, the neighborhood, our parents, even the shape of our own body, we have no influence over any of that. We must simply keep pulling that heavy bastard for as long as we can. The only thing we do have influence over is our attitude toward life. And that is exactly the theme of the first group of holders. As I said, to me, these four figures represent a philosophical matrix, which I will now draw for you to the best of my ability, which, fair warning, is very, very limited. Okay, here is our coordinate system. The x-axis represents our physical relationship with the world around us. So, on this side, we are trying to actively influence reality. On this side, we remain passive and kind of take life as it is. The y-axis represents our emotional attitude toward life. Here, we view the world as fundamentally good, and down here, we view the world as fundamentally bad. Hence our 2 by 2 philosophical matrix. We have an active positive attitude. The world is good and I am capable of making it even better. On the other side, we have an active negative. The world is horrible and because of that I will try to fight it or destroy it. Over here we have passive positive. The world is perfect as it is and needs no improvement, so I don't have to actively work on the reality around me. I'm just going to admire it, love it, and accept it. Finally, we have passive negative. The world is horrible and cannot be improved, so there is no point in trying. All that is left is quiet desperation. Okay, I do hope that makes sense to you. Now, let's apply it to the first of the four characters in Repin's painting. The one in the middle is actually known by name. Repin mentions him in his memoirs as Kanin. Now, his face is surprisingly intelligent for a man doing this kind of work, but it is also kind, and his posture is almost relaxed. Obviously, he embodies the passive positive attitude. He is a person who has learned to accept his place in life and love the world even with all its flaws. In philosophical terms, this reminds me of late Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius, the famous emperor philosopher, constantly reminds us in his writings that what we perceive as cruelty or injustice may still be necessary for the functioning of the whole. And the whole, meaning the universe, is the most perfect creation of the gods. So, if you are being beaten, robbed, or taken advantage of, accept it calmly, because that local injustice is part of the larger order of the universe. Learn to love the world as it is, and love it sincerely, and do not try to change it, because everything in it has already been predestined and decided by the gods. Now, I do not know if my suffering is necessary for the functioning of the universe, but what I do know for sure is that you subscribing to the channel is absolutely necessary for its success. So, if you like my content so far, right now would be a good time to hit that button. For you, it's just a flick of a finger, but for me, it's an immense help. So, thank you in advance. Now, back to our painting. The person to the left of Canyon, with a big bushy beard and wide shoulders, is obviously the strongest one in the group, and he is the one pulling the hardest. So, to me, he represents the active positive attitude. I bet you have seen people like that. They are usually big, strong, and handy guys, and they are naturally good at building and fixing things. They are the salt of the earth, great friends, husbands, and members of the community. They believe that whatever problem life puts in front of them, they just need to roll up their sleeves and get to work, and eventually the problem will be solved. It's a great attitude, but it has a downside. At some point, they will inevitably face a challenge that exceeds their abilities, and at that point, they might simply break spiritually. In philosophical terms, surprisingly, this reminds me of the first communists who believed that since God does not exist, people should take matters into their own hands and that they can. The whole idea of early communism was built around faith in human beings who, with their reason and labor, would be able to build a true paradise here on earth. The third figure, to the right of Kanin, is also mentioned in Rapin's memoirs. His name was Ilka, and he was a former salesman. And he is clearly one of the most brilliantly executed figure in the painting. Look how much anger there is on his face. Look at that suppressed rage, at that hatred in his piercing gaze. This is clearly a nihilist. A person who does not believe in all this perfect universe created by merciful gods bullcrap. For him, the heavens are empty, and the earth is a dump that is worth nothing. Life has been cruel and unjust to him, and he has learned to hate it back, and to hate each and every person around him. And trust me, this guy would be willing to set the whole world on fire if he only could. Finally, the tall burlak with the pipe seems to be slacking a little, trying not to pull as hard as the others. To me, he looks like a Epicurean. Now, Epicurus, the ancient Greek philosopher, was a materialist and believed that there are no gods and no immortal soul. Hence, you must accept the world as it is, because you simply have no other choice. But you're not supposed to tenderly love it or to be grateful for it, because there is no one to be grateful to. Loving or hating reality makes about as much sense as loving or hating a rock you have stumbled over. It's just a waste of time. All you can do is live your life as comfortably as you can, avoid trouble, and grasp the small pleasures that destiny sends your way. And that is exactly what the tall burlak is doing. Thus, he embodies a passive negative attitude toward life. He is not involved, either emotionally or physically. Instead, he has found a cozy spot for himself and is trying to enjoy his pipe while he can. As for the suffering of his comrades, he simply does not care. It is what it is, period. Okay, this part took us a while. Now we will move a bit faster. The second group of four burlaks, although one of them can barely be seen, represents a stern warning about life. The young man in the middle is also known by name. This is Larka, the youngest in the group. Unlike the others, he does not seem to have fully accepted his fate of doing hard and monotonous labor for the rest of his life. So he is fidgeting, jerking around, trying to adjust the hole in strap on his body. It seems like an allegory of a young hustler, a guy full of faith in himself, trying to take matters into his own hands while he is still young, start a business, make a mark, become someone. I understand his mindset perfectly, because I myself was that guy about 20 years ago. But look at the older guy right next to him, wiping sweat from his forehead. He is pulling hard, and he has probably been pulling hard his whole life, and yet he has nothing to show for it. That is the stern warning I was talking about. No matter how hard you try, success is not guaranteed. I personally know people who opened one business after another and every single one failed. And who knows why? Sometimes it's a lack of talent, sometimes it's just bad luck. In any case, you must be prepared for failure, because failure is always on the table, so to speak. And what do you do when you are 60, with pennies in your pocket and no hope for the future? Well, you try to grab onto those little joys that every life, even the most miserable one, still offers. Joys like the sun, or a fresh morning in the park, or a good smoke. Look at the old burlak to the left of Larka. He is reaching into his pouch with tobacco. To me, this is a symbol of exactly those small pleasures. Try focusing on them, even if you have nothing left. That is the lesson here. And it's a good one. Trust me, I know. And finally, the third group, which carries the humanistic message I mentioned at the beginning. Look at the last burlak in the line. We cannot even see his face because he is obviously on the brink. He is completely exhausted, he can barely walk, and he cannot even lift his eyes from the ground. This man is done. And what Repin needs him for is to reveal two completely opposite attitudes. The man in leather boots to his left, although he seems to be a bit older, is still fresh, vigorous, and optimistic. And most importantly, look at the gesture of his hand. It seems that he is reaching out to his exhausted comrade, trying to help him. This is a man who still feels sympathy for others, even though his own life is not exactly a cakewalk. And as a contrast to him, we have the burlak between them. He looks indifferently at his exhausted comrade and demonstratively folds his arms across his chest as if refusing to help him. Every man for himself, his figure says. And I bet you have seen people of this kind as well. It is so easy, after living for a while and experiencing a handful of troubles and disappointments, to become cynical and simply stop caring about others. Why should I help anyone? Nobody helped me when I needed help the most. That is what such people usually say. And yeah, they have a point. But isn't it still better to remain human in the noblest sense of the word? To remain kind, even if you have every excuse to be harsh? It seems that Repin is trying to remind us there is always a choice, and the choice is ours to make. So, this is my philosophical reading of a painting that used to be in every Soviet school textbook. What do you make of it? Do you agree with my reading? Do you think I need to restrain my imagination a little better? Do you think I need to quit YouTube and find a real job? Please let me know in the comments. Also, speaking of painting that used to be in every Soviet textbook, I have another video about such a work of art. And trust me, it is worth looking at. The video is right here. Chances are you will enjoy it, so give it a try.